Welcome to Kentucky Skills U's Instructional Technology Framework webinar series, meant to introduce adult education instructors to how these new resources can improve overall instructional and programmatic efficiency and work in concert with the implementation guide. The Instructional Technology Framework is part 5 in the 5-part introductory series. Once you've viewed all 5 parts, remember to complete the Survey Monkey Questionnaire located on the Skills U Professional Learning webpage to verify your fulfillment of this 4-hour professional learning requirement. I'm Joanna Botts. I'm the Associate Director for Language Arts and Instructional Technology at Morehead State University's Adult Education Academy. I am new to adult education, but I have approximately 14 years of classroom teaching experience encompassing 1st through 12th grades across the country. I also have 2 years of TEFL teaching experience as a former Peace Corps volunteer, teaching English as a foreign language in Mauritania, West Africa. Should you have questions for RLA or instructional technology content, you can reach me at the contact information on the screen. As the Associate Director, I am here to support you with RLA content-related questions, PLC support, and instructional technology resources and implementation. I am a Level 1 Google Certified Educator, and I help Pam Callahan with Fast Forward and EdReady support. As you view this webinar, you will get an overview of how to navigate the Instructional Technology Framework, particularly its organizational features and its layout. Additionally, I hope to demonstrate how the framework can be used to meet requirements in the implementation guide and demonstrate how the framework can be used to support measurable skill gains. But before we get to all that, let me give you a little insight into my own instructional technology background. This was probably my most used tool. Now, I don't know how many of you recognize this, but it's a chalk holder, and I still have mine. I loved it because it kept my hands clean when I was writing on the chalkboard, at least until I went to erase the board. As far as technology is concerned, this was probably my preferred tool. Yes, the overhead projector. And when I finally learned how to incorporate running an overhead transparency through a photocopier and using my inkjet printer to print onto an overhead transparency, I thought I was doing really well. And then the school went away from the blackboard and installed the whiteboards. And I thought this was even better, an even bigger leap in technology, because now I could project my transparencies onto the whiteboard and students willingly came up to interact with my technology. The first educational technology class I had introduced me to the ELMO, except my very rural, low socioeconomic school couldn't afford to have the ELMO. Luckily though, the other programs that we were exposed to in that instructional tech class, things like Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Works, we were taught how to make a database with that, and WordPerfect. Those were also introduced in that educational technology class. Eventually though, that ELMO, that little red ELMO, has become ubiquitous. And in fact, when in one interview I asked what kind of technology the classrooms had available to them, and I was told that every classroom was a smart classroom. Well, that quite frankly intimidated me because I had never used a smartboard. I was at the time barely proficient on my computer. I could take attendance and I could type out the overhead transparencies, and I had just learned how to connect my computer to the large TV monitor that was at the head of my classroom. I quickly found out that what that principle meant was that every classroom was equipped with the ELMO connected to my computer, which was also connected to a projector that would go to the whiteboard. So it wasn't quite as bad or as intimidating as I thought it would be. Despite that educational technology question and how that it made me sound, I came to tech in the classroom grudgingly. I was that proverbial horse that did not want to be led to water. I could use a computer, but I was afraid to learn anything else. Cell phones, I hated cell phones in the classroom. I hated seeing them in the hallways. In fact, I didn't even have a smartphone until June of 2013. And I thought that the only respectable use of technology in an English classroom was for publishing essays. However, along about that time, I was teaching in a PLC where my team teachers relied on PowerPoint to guide their lessons. And I quickly learned that by putting my lessons on that digital format into PowerPoint, not only made my life easier because I could quickly recall lessons that were successful, but it also made my students' lives easier because I could print out the slides from the PowerPoint, slide them into a notebook that I used to keep for students who were absent, and suddenly everything was up to date. Whereas before, by handwriting, I had to rely on taking the time to write everything out and slide it into that notebook. So up until the PowerPoint, my notebook was never up to date for those kids, but PowerPoint made it that way. And then in another high school, we had a one-to-one initiative with Chromebooks, and we were told to use them every day. That was pretty much all we were shown. We were given a basic instruction on how to set up Google Classroom, but other than that, we were kind of left out on our own. So we, again, in our PLCs, we relied on each other for technology tools and things that were working in the classroom. And eventually, this horse did come to the trough willingly, because I realized that the students needed the technology. They needed to know how to properly type, especially if they were going to go on to college and have to rely on things like Blackboard or Canvas to turn in work. I also realized that students who are going out into the career fields, they're overwhelmingly exposed to technology of some sort in their own jobs. And even though I wasn't comfortable with the technology, they were. And they enjoyed helping me learn some of these tools. So their engagement picked up in my lessons. Suddenly, snow days weren't lost days because I was able to post things in a distance learning fashion, and students didn't lose educational momentum. And the same thing happened when I was absent or a student was absent. I didn't lose instructional time. So why an adult education instructional technology framework? Well, for much the same reasons. Typically, we share our resources much like that game of telephone, haphazardly and inconsistently. And this framework was created as a one-stop, comprehensive, uniform resource for Kentucky adult educators statewide. It was also created as a living document with updated tutorials as technology changes. One prime example is the August 2018 Google Classroom update, because this framework did have to go back through a very quick revision to incorporate those changes. It also intends to have input from instructors for your own favorite tech tools, and so that they can be included in future revisions of this framework. So a little background. In June of 2018, a lady named Kim Stoltzfus polled the adult education directors on their attitudes and use of technology in the classroom. And at the time, they generally agreed that technology can support adult education in the classroom. If you look at the strongly agree and moderately agree, you see just how much they agreed with that statement. Interestingly, at the time, 95% of the directors felt that their instructors have adequate training on how to use technology in the classroom. That's question number 2, if you look at the strongly agree and moderately agree. We'll get back to that in just a moment. When it comes to implementing technology in the classroom, though, sometimes seems to be the overwhelming response. It could be that for parts of this question, we just assume that our students already know how to do these things. Parts 3 and 4 to question 11 are particularly relevant to the LINKS adult education teacher competencies. And again, it's important to note that this question related to technology use in the classroom. Kim also asked the directors about 3 greatest challenges they thought they faced in implementing technology in the classroom. Directors identified funding, a lack of student access, and a lack of student drive as the 3 greatest challenges to implementing tech in the classroom. If you look at question number 12, other challenge, directors were given the opportunity to explain what that other challenge was, and those related to challenges related to instruction in a correctional setting. I do want to point out question number 5 and question number 6, instructor motivation in using technology in the classroom and instructor comfort level. Much like that 2 slides ago, directors at the time reported that instructor use and motivation is not an issue, that students lack access to devices or internet outside of the classroom is one reason why technology isn't used more. But in August of 2018, so 3 months later, at the director's onboarding in Frankfurt, directors reported some other issues. They reported that training for their instructors and the time spent in training was probably the greatest obstruction to using more technology in the classroom. And here again, the emphasis was put on in the classroom, not outside the classroom, but in the classroom. And that teachers are not always comfortable with the technology themselves. And those responses are greatly at odds with what they reported in the June survey. However, it does provide validation for this one-stop shop framework. So, using Rosen and Stewart's blended learning for the adult education classroom as a start, the framework in its version now is a compilation meant to give instructors and directors a comprehensive list of effective technology resources that they can use in the classroom. It also provides screenshot tutorials and video tutorials on the use of those resources to alleviate the training curve for time-strapped instructors. This framework also aligns to the LINKS adult education teacher competencies, because that may become a form of classroom observation tool in the future, and this way instructors are already familiar with the competencies and can incorporate tech appropriately for those observations and for their students. But finally, given the focus on student persistence and retention in this year's PLC work, the Instructional Technology Framework has been correlated to the Persistence and Retention Framework and Self-Evaluation Tool, so that programs have other resources to use in implementing their PLC focus. So the first thing we're going to look at are the organizational features of the Instructional Technology Framework. The first thing we're going to do is go to the Kentucky Skills U website. And from here, note kentuckyskillsu.ky.gov, we're going to go to the For Educators tab and scroll down to the professional learning information. Once you're on the professional learning page, you'll notice that all of the frameworks are located under the subheading Instructional Framework Series. And we're going to look at the Instructional Technology Framework. What I want you to notice is that all 4 frameworks have the same first page explaining the color coding and the purpose of the frameworks. The second page in the Instructional Technology Framework is an alphabetical index of resources. And these resources also contain the instructor competency or the performance indicator that is associated with each tool. In some instances, a tool will have more than one performance indicator associated with it. That's so that programs who are looking for instructional technology investments get a bigger bang for their buck. The third page relates to this first one, because I don't know about you, but from one day to the next, I'm doing well to remember what happens. And I cannot remember what those adult education teacher competencies are, much less what individual performance indicators are that show mastery of that particular domain. So page 3 is an outline of those performance indicators. Each performance indicator has a blue hyperlink so that you can navigate directly to the beginning of that particular performance indicator. Once we click on one of the hyperlinks, and I'm going to choose 2.12, establishing a community of practice among learners to encourage learning, rapport. Once I click on that, I'm taken directly to the first page of that particular performance indicator. First, you'll notice that there are color-coded boxes with letters, and those correlate to areas in the Learner Persistence Program's self-evaluation tool. Those letters and color codes are placed in the same box as the teacher competency and the performance indicators. Resources also contain down and dirty descriptions that offer highlights of the resources. And when I say down and dirty, I mean that this English teacher finds that the fragments that she wrote in them are down and they are dirty, but they do offer the quick highlights for time-strapped instructors. In the third and fourth columns, you will find links to screenshot tutorials and video tutorials. The screenshot tutorials are in documents that you can download and print so that you've got easy access and direct instructions to navigate sites as you're doing that. Something I want to point out about the the screenshot tutorials, I suggest that you right-click on your mouse on the link and then open the link in a new tab. Once you have opened the link in a new tab, and you'll notice that there are other hyperlinks created within the document, but in the Google Doc view, in this view, they don't work. So what you'll have to do is click on the download arrow and then open the PDF, and suddenly the hyperlinks work. At the bottom of each page is a hyperlink to return to the beginning of the document where the performance indicators are outlined on page 3. The final thing I want to point out is the revision date. Revised copies of the framework will be uploaded, and there will be a very explicit note about the latest revision to that document. That revised date in the header only appears on the first 3 pages. You'll notice that it does not appear on the rest of the framework itself. The Instructional Technology Framework is meant to work in concert with the implementation guide. This year's PLC focus is on student learner persistence. And from Missy's webinar, we learned that 39% of students stop out before they complete the 40 hours or 30 hours and complete a level gain. Many of those reasons are situational reasons why students don't persist. And the Instructional Technology Framework and instructional technology itself can support that student persistence and keep them from stopping out, particularly when it comes to absences. In that June 2018 survey that Kim Stoltzfus conducted, 45.8% of adult education directors, program directors, reported using a learning management system. And a learning management system can help with student absences because it takes into account a way that students can make up classwork if they are absent without relying on coming back to class to receive paper copies. Oftentimes that might make a student feel even more overwhelmed. They come back, get a bunch of work, and then have to make it up before they come back. Having things online for students can help alleviate the stress of feeling behind all the time. And learning management systems that directors reported using were Canvas, Google Classroom. Some people use Edmodo or Blackboard. But one other very informal way to engage students and keep them from stopping out and keeping the POP open is through social media like Facebook. Facebook isn't a traditional learning management system. However, it is a low-stakes, highly engaged way for students to maintain contact and that sense of community with their class and their instructor. Instructional technology and this framework can also meet the implementation guideline requirements for site closures. Notice that page 10 in the implementation guideline reports that in the case of inclement weather or any other kind of site closure, students should have the opportunity to continue their classwork remotely. Remotely can be in the form of software products like FastForward or EdReady. I know many of our centers use paper packets, which are wonderful. They say that students don't have internet or accessibility outside the classroom. And don't forget that libraries, for the most part, have free access, and many don't require a library card in order to access their computers. McDonald's also offers free Wi-Fi. So there are places where students can have access to these kind of remote environments and keep up with their classwork. The implementation guideline also points out on pages 20 to 21 other areas where instructional technology can be used to meet those requirements. Low duration courses is one area. Some adult educator instructors in Kentucky, and I'm thinking specifically of Leanne Branham here, are already using online learning management systems for those low duration courses. And the guideline states that in low duration courses, learning intensity shall remain high, and a lot of those online learning management systems can do just that. They maintain high intensity and concentrated lessons. Labs are on pages 20 to 21. Facilitated labs and open labs both are perfect uses of instructional technology. Some of the resources on the framework can be used to refresh or review, remediate, and meet the IG's guidelines for labs found on those pages. Open labs, independent study and review, can also be accomplished online, and several of the resources that are on the framework can be used for that independent study, and they also provide immediate feedback and differentiated instruction, several of them for free. The most relevant use of instructional technology, though, is in supporting blended learning. Blended learning, according to Rosen and Stewart, is a combination of face-to-face and online learning components, and that can be done in a synchronous environment, meaning at the same time. And here I'm thinking of something like using Google Hangouts or Facebook Live or Zoom to conduct a class. Or they can also be asynchronous, meaning the lesson is accessed anytime that is convenient for the adult learner. Think of a lesson that might be uploaded to a learning management system like Google Class or Canvas, and that can be accessed and finished at a time that is convenient for the student. Facebook Live also automatically saves whatever video is going on in that Facebook Live event, and students can still access the video at a later, more convenient time for them. CARES reports this kind of blended learning as distance learning. Using ready-made online curricula such as Fast Forward and EdReady is probably the easiest way to track distance learning for several reasons. One, because it meets that definition on page 40 in the IG that states that a program should disconnect after a preset period of inactivity. Additionally, another reason that those are probably the easiest online curricula is because the lessons are already completed for you. Other online curricula that Kentucky Adult Ed uses is ITTS and WIN. Remember, though, that ITTS will sunset in June of 2019 when TABE 910 expires. Tech programs that do not disconnect a learner after a certain period of inactivity can still be used for reporting in CARES, as long as local policy has been established setting a specific time for that technology assignment, similar to the way a program would award time for paper-based products. Programs must determine proxy hours for those products being used as distance learning. If an online curriculum or site does not automatically track hours, then the program, not the instructor, must assign a standard amount of time for each block or section. If we look at the example in the distance learning log, we see an example for EdReady and how much time was spent in EdReady, and we also see an example for a site called No Red Ink. And this is an example of a site that does not disconnect after a certain period of time and actually assigns a range of time to complete. And let me take you to that site. In No Red Ink, you can view assignments that you have created. And after you've created assignments and even units, you can go back and edit. But when you create those assignments, an estimated time range to complete the assignment is generated. And this is where, like a paper packet, a program would decide how much time should be awarded. And that range of time depends on how much remediation and instruction goes on with those missed questions. A program can decide to award the low end, 45 minutes. It can decide to award the high end, 90, or it can award somewhere in between. That still would be awarded and decided at the program level, given the time that was assigned to complete that online equivalent of a paper packet. If you ever have doubts about how to report distance learning time, contact your regional associate. The purpose of instructional technology is not to replace the high-quality instruction you are already providing. It is only meant to supplement what you're already doing in the classroom and to help prepare your students for the 21st century workforce. And notice that all of our key sectors include some element of technology in them. I also want to point out that the GED is computer-based. So getting students familiar and comfortable with using technology in the classroom also gets them more comfortable using it for the test. So let's see how we can realistically use the Instructional Technology Framework to support measurable skill gains. And let's look at this first scenario. We're looking at a student who scored at an M level on reading with a scale score of 465. With that scale score in mind, and after viewing Lori's webinar that showed us that at the M level, key ideas and details down here at the bottom, this particular part of the test encompasses about 47% of the level M test. So I'm going to try and get a big bang for my buck and find a lesson that addresses key ideas and details. So I'm going to go to the RLA framework, and I want to find level M, key ideas and details, or maybe even because I'm trying to bump up the skill gain, I might go to D. So let's go to D, level D, high impact indicators. And I see determine a central idea of a text and how it is conveyed through particular details. And all of the resources out to the side, I see possible ideas to use to teach for that. All of these are lesson bank lessons. That's what the yellow means. One on here looks really interesting, this active listening and lineman interviews, because I have a few students in class who have actually expressed an interest in being a lineman. And given that this is a D level, then that person is at right in the middle of an M. I might use this as a less intimidating way to teach main idea and details. So I'm clicking on the link, and up pops the lesson preview, and I can sign in and grab my lesson and go. I can print out the lesson and we can use it in class, and I can show the videos in class, and that's perfectly acceptable. But what happens if a student is absent for that particular lesson? And not only that, but is this lesson in its state right now very engaging? To meet the implementation guideline for student absences, I might take this paper lesson, which again the student would have to get once he or she returned to class, and I might instead turn it into a PowerPoint and upload it to Google Classroom. And here is the PowerPoint that the student could follow asynchronously. Here are the interviews uploaded. Here's an article that's included in the lesson, and here is the question sheet that the student has to complete. And because we did it in class and we have a general idea about how long the lesson took, we know how long the student would engage in this activity outside of class. Another way to engage students in class with that same exact lesson, because with that PowerPoint, all I did was take what was on that grab-and-go lesson and put it on a PowerPoint. Another way to actively engage students in the classroom is using what's called Nearpod. Nearpod takes my same presentation and allows me to guide students through the lesson while they are on their own devices. Nearpod works with phones, and it also works with desktops and laptops and iPads. So as I am going through this lesson, students also see the same thing on their own device. And they can watch the videos on their own. Which is more engaging for students, the paper and pencil lesson, or something like this that's interactive and the Nearpod? Finally, the lesson itself is saved in digital form, which actually saves you prep time. Let's look at a math scenario that involves instructional technology. This particular student, Mike Johnson, he works for DRC. This particular student scored an M level 584 on math. And from his diagnostic, I see that he is partially proficient in fractions and in base 10. And while I know, and this chart is from page 30 on the implementation guideline, while I know that fractions are not heavily tested at level D or A. In fact, they're not tested at all, fractions per se. I do know that fractions is a necessary foundation for ratios, and you notice that ratios are tested at level A. I know that fractions are important to understand algebra, and they're important for decimals. So I still want to do some teaching to make sure that this person can go from the 584, which is a high medium, and he'll probably be tested in D, but I need a little bit more just to help make sure that he gets what he needs. So I'm going to go to the math framework and find level M high emphasis items for fractions. Find math high emphasis. And I see high emphasis, level M, fractions, no high emphasis questions in this category. But because Ms. Callahan said that doesn't mean that there aren't questions on here, and we know that there are, we're going to go down to the medium emphasis questions, because we know that this just means fractions aren't tested more often than anything else. And I see here some standards for fractions, and I also see some ideas for lessons. From here, what I might do, if I know that there are other students in class who have problems with fractions, I could look and see, add and subtract fractions, adding fractions with the same denominator, multiply fractions. I can download one of the lessons from the lesson bank, and I can pick the playlist that students might be able to watch who are a little bit ahead. So what I can do is pull up the lesson bank lesson for understanding fractions, and I might teach in a small group to those students who need a little bit more guided instruction than, say, Mike, who just needed some refreshing in multiplication of fractions and whole numbers, because that's the information I've gotten back from my additional diagnostic. Other students may be working on addition of fractions, and others may be working on division. And I can do the same thing, just give the hippocampus playlist that was suggested in the framework. But after they're done, I need to find a tool that will allow them to practice and provide immediate feedback for answers after the instruction. And that is where the Instructional Technology Framework comes in. So once I'm on the Instructional Technology Framework, the index at this point may or may not help me. I do see that hippocampus is listed on the resource, and it addresses performance indicator 2.21, whatever the heck that means. I've heard IXL, think that that might work. But let's go down, because I want specifically something that's going to provide adaptive practice and immediate feedback. And I see that 2.35 includes modeling and provides immediate feedback to learners. So that looks like the performance indicator I might want to try. So I click on the hyperlink, and lo and behold, there is IXL, and there's something called AAA no red ink. I see the word grammar. Let me read the description for IXL. I see that unlimited practice comes with a price. Well, my particular program had to spend an awful lot of money on those TABE answer sheets, so I know that we have not bought a subscription to IXL. So I might go down to AAA No. I see it's a free alternative to IXL. I'm going to right-click and open the link to the instructions for AAA Math in another frame, in another window, and I can read the directions there on how to get started. And once I've done that, I can click on the link to AAA No, and I can find the math topics, fractions, and I can make the assignments straight for and differentiate for individual students. And what I want to point out is that these lessons, or these also come with a relearning, a refresh, a remediation of the lesson, and then practice. And when you start, a timer starts. So you can see how much time a student spends practicing. It also keeps track of the number of problems and the percentage correct that is done. They can report totals and print it in the class. You can also show the students how to copy and paste their results into an email. Since I'm talking about IXL, I do want to point out that IXL offers more than instruction and repetition and drill in math. It also offers repetition and drill in language arts, in science, and science goes up to 8th grade skills, and social studies. Social studies also goes up to 8th grade. Language arts, if you pay for a subscription, you can change these levels out to the side, so rather than see what grade level, students will see other designations for these levels. I also want to point out that skills here are broken down by standards: editing and revising, vocabulary, grammar. Finally, I want to point out that with a paid subscription to IXL, you get what are called analytics, where instructors can see how much time has been spent in particular lessons, in particular standards. And you see down here, this particular student spent 14 minutes, answered 23 questions on solving systems of linear inequalities by graphing. So there are very relevant uses for distance learning with a paid subscription for IXL. Those are just a few ways that instructional technology can be used to make measurable skill gains and to increase student engagement and persistence, all while meeting requirements in the implementation guideline. This framework is for you. It is a living document. It is open to revision and submissions and recommendations from the field. Please complete the Survey Monkey. Don't forget to do that so that you get your professional learning credit. Pay particular attention to questions 6 and 7. And keep in mind other tools and instructional technology tools that you might use. Thank you for viewing this webinar. Again, I'm Joanna Botts. I am here for your RLA and instructional technology needs. While I am learning adult ed and how to navigate TABE and GED, I am always on the lookout for answers, and even if I don't have an immediate answer for you, I will find one. My contact information is on the screen again. Please, before you forget, and before I forget, I want to tell you that this framework is for you. It is a living document. I would love to have feedback on how it can be made more user-friendly. I am open for feedback on what you use in the field that you find useful. And I would like to include those on future revisions of this framework. Please don't forget to complete the Survey Monkey for your professional learning credit. And I would like some feedback, especially on questions 6 and 7. And this is where I can look for things to include on future editions of the framework. IT tools that you use, how can the framework itself or the screenshot tutorials be made more instructor friendly? And in general, any other feedback as part of your professional learning credit on any of the other frameworks that you've seen. Thank you.